Like many children that grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s, Saturday morning cartoons were an important part of my life. Monday through Friday, I was doing the things that other people told me I had to do. But I had an agreement with my mom that if all my chores and my homework were done, that when Saturday morning rolled around, she would let me sleep in until 8:30 and have from then until 11:30 to myself so I could watch the Saturday morning cartoon lineup. I got exposed to a lot of different kinds of cartoons as a child. Scooby-Doo, Looney Tunes, Dexter's Lab, Power Rangers, Sonic X, and even some early anime. But the shows that interested me the most were always superhero shows. Shows like the 90s X-Men and the 90s Spider-Man, or newer shows like X-Men Evolution, The Spectacular Spider-Man, or even Young Justice. These shows grabbed me and held my attention in a way other shows just didn't. Most kids enjoy superheroes growing up. It's almost pathological. Something about the capes, the superpowers, the quippy one-liners, fantastic settings, and the sense of morality and justice just appeals to most kids, I think. Though I will admit most comics are written to appeal to boys. Most of my childhood recesses were spent running around the playground with my group of friends playing some ill-defined game that had us pretending to be superheroes. But there's a difference between running around on the playground pretending to be a character and actually getting to embody that character, even fight alongside them, with the latter being something that video games are uniquely qualified to do. There's never been a shortage of superheroes in video games, from licensed heroes like Batman and Spider-Man to more fringe heroes like Spawn and Blade. The superhero experience has always been one that video games are uniquely qualified to provide, since the core of most superheroes is the power fantasy of being super strong, fast, or tough. And yet, as we grow older, we seem to grow out of this phase where superheroes are so cool, as we mature and our understanding of the world becomes more complex. The story of heroes in brightly colored capes saving the world start to lose their luster. Their often black and white views of morality and ethics becoming untenable to us as we grow older and more jaded by the knowledge that reality is anything but black and white, that what is right and what is wrong is not always dramatically different, and that villains rarely ever sneer or twirl their mustaches while monologuing about their villainous evil plans. That cartoon logic that most superhero shows operate on begins to break down when faced with the hard facts of reality. When this happens, it's not uncommon for those once fans to simply fall out of comics and their stories, giving them up for a while others instead search for comics and superheroes more grounded in realism or at least more acknowledging of the reader's mature mindset. Agents of Mayhem is a game that tries to straddle those two ideologies at the same time. It embraces the bright and shiny, highly saturated, bombastic world of kids' comics, where heroes are fun and quippy and always save the day while looking cool or pretty and can do no wrong so long as by the end of the story the villain is behind bars, while also portraying, in that still highly saturated color palette, a world that is falling apart at the seams as the forces of evil overwhelm governments and nations, leaving the common people in desperate need of heroes to save them. I remember buying Agents of Mayhem when it first came out. I'd only recently discovered Volition and their Saints Row series. I'd finished playing Saints Row 3 and was probably halfway through Saints Row 4 when I sat down to watch the coverage of that year's E3 Expo. Shout out to the now defunct Channel G4 for starting the trend of reporting from E3. At the time, I was very much out of my superhero phase in life. Mostly, I was just a tired call center employee, struggling with major depression, a lack of direction in my life, and very few friends to talk to. Because of these factors, this game didn't leave much of an impression on me. I remember I liked some of the humor, and the open world was fun to just run around in, but honestly, I think I played this game for like a week and then changed to some other game that was a bit more speedy with the feel-good chemicals, because that's what I needed out of my games at the time. But I always kept meaning to come back to it, but as the years went on and new games were released, it kept getting pushed further back until I basically forgot about it. Then, a few months ago, when I was looking for my copy of the Saints Row 2022 reboot, I found this disc at the back of my game drawer and made a mental note to give this game another try. And now, I find myself in dire need of bad jokes, fun characters, and a world to run around in, save, and just have fun with. So what better way to do that than to suit up and save the world? So let's explore this game together. The good and the bad, the hits and the misses. Please also keep in mind that I am by no means an expert on any of the subjects covered in this video, and if you have opinions that differ from mine, that is okay. Right off the bat, Agents of Mayhem hits you with a Saturday morning-esque cartoon sequence. The sinister Dr. Babylon crash landing in an as-of-yet unnamed city, deploying his Chaos Troopers and causing havoc before being stopped by the Agents of Mayhem, specifically 3 of them, Hollywood, Hardtack, and Fortune. And after a brief battle, they repel the forces of evil and save the city. This opening cinematic immediately grounds you in this world and tells you all you need to know about it. This is a game about heroes and villains. These heroes have no qualms about killing those who work for the villains, and heroes will always win over the villains. After this sequence, we're given an in-game cutscene that sees a woman by the name of Persephone and one of her underlings named Friday having a slightly tense and awkward conversation while on the way to give us our mission. Simply put, Persephone's arch-enemy Dr. Babylon has been located and is in possession of a dark matter warhead, a weapon that can undo the very fabric of reality itself. Our mission has 2 objectives. 1. Steal the warhead to keep Babylon from using it, and 2. Kill Dr. Babylon. It's the tutorial mission, and functions pretty much as you'd expect it to. That being said, it's actually pretty fun and does a good job of giving you decent arenas to run around in and practice using the various characters' powers, as well as playing as the different heroes as you delve deeper into Babylon's base. Stealing the warheads is pretty easy. Just drop down as Fortune, shoot some guys, click a few prompts, and boom, they're ours. Yay! Killing Babylon is harder, as by this point he's aware that someone is in his base who shouldn't be. Battling him is definitely not difficult, just shoot him when his shields are down, and then when they're up, whittle down his guards while avoiding blasts from him. Eventually he gets bored and drops this line about when all you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail, which is a line I really enjoyed because I was honestly kind of thinking the same thing at this point. He then makes his escape, but not before releasing some kind of orb into the city above. Grabbing a lift, we get another short animated sequence before being thrown into the main open world of the game and tasked with following the orb as it wanders around the city of Seoul, South Korea. Once it finds the perfect spot, it nests and starts pulling together debris and rock to form itself into a golem. Even if the boss fight is pretty basic, I'm enjoying myself so far. Battling the golem is appropriately cheesy and fun, and it goes down pretty fast, so it's not some dragged-down, drawn-out slugfest. Afterwards, we're called back to the Ark, which serves as the player's hub for interacting with several NPC characters, upgrading their characters' gear and vehicles, as well as managing some light mobile-inspired timed missions that see us sending our agents to different corners of the world. If I'm honest, the Ark is just okay. I really want to like it. It's a place for the agents and people that they work with to hang out and relax, but honestly, there just isn't much to do here. Yes, there's a few arena challenges you can run, and some of the NPCs have interactable items around them, but that's about it. You can't even run into other agents that you're not playing as, which is a big disappointment, as there are definitely some agent interactions I would love to see. But as it is, it's disappointing. So to me, I treat it more like a loadout screen, a place where you can customize and upgrade your agents, select the world difficulty, and then launch your gaming session from here. Anyways, from here we're turned loose into the open world. The game gives us some busy work, placing a teleporter beacon for us to launch to when we leave the Ark, taking over a small mechanic shop to supply one of the NPCs with parts to maintain and build our equipment. It's all very by-the-book stuff. The characters of Agents of Mayhem are definitely its strongest feature. Each of the 15 heroes plays completely differently, has their own attributes, responses to events in-game, and has a fully fleshed out, albeit minimal backstory to them. Each of them also has a series of missions throughout the game that sees them furthering their own personal goals, which do a decent job of making the characters feel like they have depth to them, even if, in the overall scheme of the game, these missions don't really change the characters in any way. As it is, each character has a larger-than-life personality that the game definitely leans into for most of its playtime. Hollywood, a former action hero and movie star turned frontman and face for Mayhem, after a mishap on one of his shows resulted in a careless death. His character mission focuses on dealing with a deranged fan who's become obsessed with him. Fortune is a high-tech Latin American thief and sky pirate who is hired to join Mayhem for her skills as a thief and tech pirate. Her mission centers around her struggles to not have her identity swallowed by the Mayhem organization. Rama is a virologist from India who is trained in the ways of the hunter and who has joined Mayhem on the condition that the group's leader Persephone aid her in finding a possible treatment or cure for the plague that is ravaging Rama's home country of Dubai. Yeti, a genetically modified Russian super soldier who also has the ability to channel ice and cold-based abilities. His main goal is to protect Russia from Legion. The character Yeti is sort of a what-if spin on the character Oleg from Saints Row 3 and 4. Oni, a former Yakuza member who executed his former gang once he discovered Legion had infiltrated them and was using them for their own purposes. Kingpin, a rapper and record mogul who was able to use his wealth and influence to unite several street gangs in his local city into a single large gang that was able to repel Legion when they tried to attack. The character Kingpin is a what-if spin on the character Pierce from Saints Row 3 and 4. Safeword, a brilliant hacker and computer specialist who joined Mayhem out of a desire to put her skills against other hackers and criminals. The character is a what-if spin on the character Kinsey Kensington from Saints Row 3 and 4. Though, if I'm honest, they've barely made any changes to her at all. She even looks the same as she did in the Saints Row series. Hardtack, a former United States Navy lieutenant who joined Mayhem after Legion attacked the ship he was serving on while they were escorting valuable technology. He hopes to avenge those who perished in the attack and prevent Legion from carrying out similar attacks in the future. The NPC Gremlin seems to have a small crush on him, and they do kind of flirt back and forth throughout the entirety of the game. Lazarus, a former soldier for Mayhem that was transformed into a combination of organic and synthetic life form when she was killed in action. She definitely fills the role of the on-the-spectrum style character that a lot of games had around this time. Braddock, a former United States Marine whose recruits turned traitor and joined Legion. She's now on a personal mission to hunt them all down and kill them. Braddock also seems to be in a secret relationship with Friday, which I found rather sweet in an early LGBT representation kind of way. Daisy, a roller derby tough girl who likes drinking, cussing, fighting, and fucking. She joined Mayhem for the fights and the fun. In doing research for this game, Daisy seems to have been a developer favorite character, as she's mentioned in several different interviews. Jewel, a brilliant and beautiful weapons expert and inventor whose father was kidnapped by Legion and forced to build their weapons. She joined Mayhem in hopes of finding her father and making Legion pay for kidnapping. Gat, a former hot-headed Seoul police officer who was injured during the attacks on Devil's Night. He spent a year in a coma before waking up to find that human police officers had been replaced with robots. He joined Mayhem to show them that humans can still do things better than robots. He's also a reference to Johnny Gat, a long-standing character in the Saints Row franchise. Scheherazade, the most mysterious of the player characters. Virtually nothing is known about Scheherazade except that she is a skilled combatant. She possesses a strange amulet that allows her to seal dimensional rifts that form when people carelessly use dark matter. And she seems to have some knowledge of what is on the other side of these rifts, though she refuses to say exactly what. Each character initially fits into one of several types of characters, with a secondary type being unlocked when the character reaches level 10. But these bonuses amount to little more than extra damage dealt to certain kinds of enemies, or else the ability to bypass the hacking minigame. One small tangent I will mention, no one in Mayhem or Legion deals with any kind of arcane or magical abilities, which kind of makes me think that they probably don't exist in this universe. That's not really important or anything, it's just something I noticed and was a little bummed about, as magical superheroes have always been some of my personal favorites. The characters themselves are designed pretty well, perhaps with not the most imaginative costumes, but enough to be visually interesting. In particular, I like the metal bands that cover Lazarus's body, and the tattoos that cover Oni's chest in one of his alternate costumes. I think Daisy probably has the most distinctive design, again reinforcing my belief that she was the developer's favorite character. As I progressed in the story and finished unlocking all of the playable characters, I can't help but bemoan the lack of characters with actual powers. Lazarus and Yeti are the only two that can truly be considered superhuman. In a world like this, I can't help but wish that there were more, as I feel like Mayhem would definitely be interested in such individuals. Apparently a cut character by the name of Jawbreaker was supposed to possess superhuman strength, but was cut from the game's initial release intending to be DLC, only to be cancelled when the game didn't sell well. I will give Volition credit where credit is due, however. Each character feels very distinctive. From their combat abilities to their jump and idle animations, each character has their own very distinct and well-designed personality and moveset. This distinctiveness of each character extends into combat as well. As mentioned before, each character falls into a different category, which gives them bonuses when fighting certain types of enemies. But the way they go about fighting these enemies are completely different. Hollywood is the most generic character, being your standard soldier stand-in character who fights with guns and grenades. He deals moderate damage and has decent enough health and shield. On the other hand, Jewel, a spunky model-esque inventor, uses a weapon that never needs to be reloaded, instead using the reload button to deploy a portable turret that she can then empower with her special ability, increasing its firing rate and damage output. Rama is a sniper-style character who's capable of dealing a lot of damage in a short period of time by holding your shots and charging them up, and who is capable of laying traps with her special around the battlefield for unsuspecting enemy soldiers to wander into. All of the characters are like this, with distinct abilities and playstyles. The game really encourages you to try out each hero for a while, and find which ones you like the most, then compose your team of them. Occasionally, while you're out running around, characters you have not selected might call you or chime in to a given situation, giving the group a good sense of chemistry with one another, and doing a bit to sell the idea that these are characters who know each other and have worked together for a while now, which for the most part works really well and feels pretty natural. Each hero also has their own traversal mechanic, having a double or triple jump to help get around the city. Some heroes also possess a dash, though some dashes can only be used on the ground, while others can be used in the air. And a few characters even lack this dashing mechanic, instead having the ability to turn invisible and evade enemies for a short time. If I'm honest, I kinda wish this part was left up to the player. I find the lack of air dash on some characters to be really disappointing, as it's useful for covering long distances in the city. The turning invisible ability can be very useful at times too, as I've used it many times to avoid enemies when I'm low on health, but there are other times where I'll be running through the city and think to myself that being able to dash right now would be a lot more useful. Overall, the characters of Agents of Mayhem are its biggest asset. Each of them is larger than life and does a great job of painting themselves as an established character that existed in the world prior to this game, with their own motivations and history. Even the background characters like Friday and Persephone share these traits, making them memorable, though I will admit that some of the lesser background characters are not as interesting. Little side note here, anytime the player elects to return to their base of operations in the Ark, they're shown a short 3 to 7 second voice clip loading screen featuring either an unlocked player character or one of the background characters making some quippy little comment. Depending on how often you return to the Ark, I can see this becoming annoying, and I'll admit that there are 1 or 2 of these sound bites that I dislike, but for the most part, I enjoy these. I feel like they, again, contribute to the feeling of a Saturday morning cartoon or comic book. Of course, after we blow our shot at killing Dr. Babylon in the tutorial, we aren't just given another whack at him right away. No, in true superhero Saturday morning cartoon fashion, we'll have to spend some time taking out his lieutenants and his support first. Starting with his resident weapon maker and mad industrialist, a man by the name of Hammersmith. We're given a small cutscene, again done in a wonderful animation that explains that Hammersmith used to work for various governments of the world, before vanishing when Legion began to take an interest in his skills, and made him an offer they were sure he couldn't refuse. As the resident mad industrialist and techno-genius, Hammersmith is kinda like an evil Tony Stark, with lots of toys to throw at us as we work to unravel his plans, which, as it turns out, centers around a comet that's passing nearby Earth. Having been tasked with capturing the comet by Dr. Babylon, Hammersmith sets about turning Sol's planetarium into a tractor beam in the hopes of pulling the comet to Earth. I enjoy the battle here for the most part. The hacking minigame is used here to overload Hammersmith's shields, lowering them and allowing us to deal damage to him for a short while before he re-ups them, and we repeat the process a few more times. The level design is also pretty good here, though I'll admit the constant background jokes about the planet Uranus get on my nerve a little bit. I'm no longer 12. Jokes about Uranus aren't that funny to me anymore, and just kind of feel like low effort compared to the kind of jokes I know the writers can make. After beating Hammersmith, we learn that although defeated, his plan was at least a partial success, allowing him to drag the comet close enough to Earth to attach to an orbital mining laser, and begin melting away the ice and dust exocrust covering the real prize inside. While he's doing this, the debris coming off the comet begins to rain down on Sol, causing chunks of ice and rock to fall from the sky as we drive around the city trying to locate Hammersmith's main lair by triangulating his signal. After the first marker, Hammersmith starts shooting his space laser at us, which adds a fun additional obstacle to dodge and weave through. This sequence is alright. Honestly, I think it would be more enjoyable if the streets of Sol weren't so small and narrow, as I feel like I'm constantly crashing into other cars or buildings as I race around while avoiding all the hazards arrayed against me. I will also mention that getting hit by this laser is not an automatic kill, which I find kind of disappointing, as I think that should definitely be something that would kill me in one shot. Once we've scanned 3 waypoints, we're directed to a hidden underground base that our characters have to raid and fight our way through, with each room having its own condition to leave, such as defeating all the enemies, hacking 3 hidden terminals, or defeating a mini-boss. and at the end of this phase is where we battle Hammersmith again. This battle is a bit more complicated than the first one. Phase 1 is your standard kill ads and shoot the boss, but Phase 2 sees Hammersmith using turrets that fire slow-moving but area-of-effect style projectiles at us. And the final phase has Hammersmith using his space laser to power 2 dark energy orbs that project a continuous beam of energy that follows us around the room, which we have to then trick into destroying a series of shield generators. And then there's also this phase where we have to shoot these energy balls that he's generating and redirect them back at him. It's a whole thing. Upon defeating Hammersmith, his systems overload and destroy the mining laser platform that's been harvesting the dark matter crystal from the comet, sending it hurtling away from Earth and into deep space, much to the anger of Dr. Babylon, who is forced to enact his Plan B, much to Hammersmith's annoyance. Small tangent here, I would love it if just once a comic book cartoon and villain was just wildly efficient and on point. Like, yeah, you can have your little laser shooty time with Mayhem, but you could have also been bringing the crystal back to Earth while you did so. Honestly, Hammersmith could have easily succeeded if he had just focused on his goal and not gotten so caught up in killing us. Combat in Agents of Mayhem is your standard mix of guns, beams, arrows, and melee attacks. Each character has a passive ability, as well as a special and super that they can unleash on Legion at their discretion. Lacking a skill tree, skills can be modified by gadgets, which never change the special outright, and more just alter how they function. For example, Rama's special is to fire a trap arrow that explodes when it's triggered by an enemy stepping on it. On its own, it deals a high amount of damage over a moderate amount of space. Great for when enemies are clustered up together. But if I wish, I can equip the Panic Trap gadget, which instead will reduce the amount of damage she deals with her special, but instead will also make enemies who survive the initial attack suffer a panicked-induced state for a brief period of time. And pretty much all specials are like this, offering some kind of trade-off between more damage or applying some additional status effect. For some characters, this is useful, like Yeti, whose main weapon isn't very powerful, but whose special can enhance his damage for a short time as well as freeze nearby enemies in their place. Super abilities are about what you'd expect, usually taking some aspect of the character and enhancing it to a major degree for a brief moment. For example, Lazarus's weapons allow her to throw nanites onto enemies who damage them over a period of time. Her special allows her to deal additional damage as well as automatically latch themselves on to nearby enemies rather than waiting to be manually directed like usual. Hollywood's super is another example, which creates an area of effect around him where random explosions will damage nearby enemies, as well as supercharge the damage he himself is dealing with his weapon. One complaint I do have about the combat is the amount of damage enemies can deal to you. It feels a little off. If you're surrounded and caught out in the open, you can go down very easily, depending on what character you're playing. Rama, for example, can't survive more than a dozen or so hits before being taken out of commission. And while I do understand that not all heroes are tanks who can survive round after round after round after round, it does feel like the amount of damage some can take is really low, even on the lower difficulties. Combat in this game also has a tendency to snowball and compound the longer it goes on, especially in the open world. It'll start out simple enough. You'll drop down into some alley to ambush a Legion patrol, or climb some building to free some hostage strapped to a bomb. After defeating the initial wave of enemies, additional troops will teleport in typical jabroni fashion. So you run around and kill them too, cause you could use the cash they drop. Then more enemies will teleport in, accompanied by some ninja ladies who will attack much faster than the normal troops. So you kill them too, cause hey, more money or experience is always good. Then the game throws some enemies at you that have more health, and at about this time you might decide that it's not worth it and bail on the encounter. Eventually, the game will throw a commander at you, and you'll have to contend with his shields, armor, and health. Your reward if you win this battle? More money, some modest loot, and an infamy wipe that allows you to go about your merry way. Running from combat does not remove your infamy, though, and instead, after you get a certain distance away, your infamy will slowly start to tick down, reducing in level until it reaches 0 and combat is ended. Or else you can find a rooftop encounter with a Legion missile or database, destroy it, and that will reduce your infamy to 0 instantly. Or you can stay and fight, during which the game will drop said commander on you, who not only has a lot of health, but also armor and shields to contend with. And for some heroes, these guys are almost trivial, but for others, they can represent a significant challenge. Funnily enough, though, doing battle in the middle of the street is a painfully bad idea, and I died more than once to being hit by a random car rather than an enemy's bullet, which, if I'm honest, I find a bit odd. If I look at the oncoming cars and shoot at them, they turn around and try to flee. But if I'm shooting at an enemy, the cars will continue to drive down the road like normal, which leads me to getting hit by them more often than not. Another thing I will mention is that from time to time, the combat in this game can perhaps get a little too frantic. Especially when doing battle in a confined space, it can be hard to maneuver and avoid taking damage, and there are times where perhaps there are too many special effects going on the screen. And while some of it can be mitigated by adjusting the difficulty, I never found combat to be 100% what I wanted it to be. Don't get me wrong, after a while it feels comfortable enough, but there are one or two nitpicks that keep it from being great. Apart from your character's abilities, there is Gremlin tech as well as Legion gadgets, which you can build and equip back at the Ark. Legion tech is mostly passive bonuses that you apply to your character's equipped gadgets, with the catch being that they only equip to a single gadget. So for example, if I have Rama's tripwire gadget equipped and then I add Legion tech upgrade to it, if I swap out the tripwire for something else, I also lose access to that Legion tech bonus. Some of the bonuses can be pretty nice, like dealing extra damage or getting a little bit of health back per kill, or reducing ability cooldowns when dodging. Usually nothing game-breaking, but enough that it can change how you play your character slightly. Gremlin tech, however, are deployable power-ups that have a finite number of uses and then have to be bought from Gremlin at the Ark. They're okay. I do like Daisy's one, which is basically summoning a giant steel ball to hurtle forward in front of you and deal damage to anything it hits. Oni also has a nice one that makes anyone inside of an area around me vulnerable to bonus damage. If I'm being completely honest, I tend to forget about Gremlin tech, and Legion tech took me a while to figure out, and strangely enough, I don't recall there being a tutorial about it. Overall, combat in Agents of Mayhem is nothing new to write home about. That being said, it works pretty well and does a good job of giving each hero a distinct feel and playstyle. Controls feel tight, abilities feel good, and you're incentivized to swap between heroes depending on the situation. If your current hero just isn't cutting it in your current encounter, it might be time to swap. Some player skill is definitely involved in knowing what heroes are best for what situations, or else how to best play a certain hero, but the lack of skill tree is disappointing, at least from a modern gaming perspective, making characters feel pretty much the same in Hour 30 as they do in Hour 1. Then again, if you like how the characters play from the get-go, this might not be as much of a problem. August Gaunt is apparently the youngest member of Legion, a pop music star who started to dabble in questionable and unethical hypnotic mind-controlling technology to increase his fame and wealth until he caught the attention of Legion. They wanted access to his technology and money, and he just wanted a way to become even more famous, a match made in heaven. The first part of his arc sees us going to a club he's supposed to be performing at, only to discover that he took off with a bunch of fans in one of his ugly sports cars. Luckily, Friday is able to locate the car a few blocks away inside of a parking garage. Somehow? Once we arrive, we're tasked with scanning the possible cars for any clues as to what Gaunt's plan might be, and it's here that Gaunt hacks our communications and taunts us, sending a few dozen henchmen to try and kill us as he badmouths us over the radio. After dealing with them, we find a hidden console that reveals a hidden car, which is apparently Gaunt's favorite car. In fact, he loves it so much, not only has he named it Tiffany, but he's installed a self-destruct system in it in case anyone but him gets their hands on it. Fortunately for us, we're driving the car, and being the dumbass that Gaunt is, he lets slip that he's at the nearby ancestral temple, but that he's locked the door. Putting 2 and 2 together, we make 4 and use the now primed to explode car to blast our way through the locked gates of the temple and confront Gaunt only to find that it was a setup and more Legion troops are waiting for us. At this point, I'm kinda surprised that the normie henchmen don't run away from us screaming in terror with how many of them we've killed so far. Their benefits must be really good. After mopping up this group, we scan the computers Gaunt had been using and sift through some voice logs looking for any information that might be useful before eventually uncovering some information about a secret rave that Gaunt is holding in the shipping yard. Fun fact, the shipping yard has also been a part of Gat's, Oni's, and Kingpin's personal missions, so we've certainly been here before. After shooting our way past the doorman, we find Gaunt and witness his latest invention, a new VR headset that also acts as a mind control device. And we're introduced to this by what has to be one of the most overtly erotic commercials I have ever seen in a video game. Seriously, if you thought Cyberpunk's advertisements were sexual, just watch this.
Boy, Gaunt! All you beautiful peeps came out tonight to help me test my latest invention, the Get Gauntlet 2.0! Hey there, ladies and bros. I want to show you something special. Something unlike anything you've ever seen before. This is the Get Gauntlet 2.0, the VR headset of your dreams. It gives you news, it plays your music, it lets you connect to the important people in your lives. Just another slice of genius from me, Honorary Doctor of Musical Arts, August Gaunt. It's a new age, baby. The age of Gaunt. God, I love y'all so much!
Anyways, Friday figures out that Gaunt is using 3 local antennas to manipulate the people at the rave, and so we set about to destroy those antennas while trying not to harm the innocent mind-controlled civilians, or in my case, basically replaying No Russian, featuring a 6-foot-tall American skater girl with a minigun, a Latin sky pirate with a taser drone, and an Indian virologist with a penchant for explosive arrows and roundhouse kicking. After we destroy each antenna, the mind control is disrupted, and we are recalled to the Ark to discuss our next move against Gaunt. Gaunt's next mission is similarly a waste of time, as it sees us trying to track down where he's been manufacturing his little mind-controlling VR helmets. Sadly, this evil twink of a pop star is one step ahead of a multi-billion-dollar crime-fighting organization, and ends up leading us all around the city on a wild goose chase, all while taunting us and forcing us to deal with Legion troops and snipers that he's set up in various ambushes. I'll be honest, it's about here that Gaunt's pop star personality really starts to grate on my nerves. He's basically an evil Justin Bieber type, and as someone who already doesn't like the normal Bieber, evil Bieber is even worse. Luckily for us, Friday seems to be taking these recent comeuppances personally, because in the next mission, she seems to have finally figured out where the real factory for these helmets is, and she wants us to go burn it down. With pleasure. So we spend the next 15 minutes or so smashing up another Legion base, destroying anything we can get our hands on, and killing a dozen or so Legion troops before hopping in our car and speeding off to deal with Gaunt himself. The race to Gaunt is a time trial style race, and it isn't very hard, but it does have kind of a cool jump towards the end that sees us smashing through a building, which is kind of dope. Dealing with Gaunt is actually pretty straightforward. Like most bosses, he has the 3-phase battle system, with the first phase being just us beating his ass until he cries like a little bitch. I got kinda lucky here and managed to get him stuck in a corner, meaning his AoE attacks didn't do much against me, so I think this phase went by even easier for me than it normally should. Phase 2 sees Gaunt up on some floating platform crooning his little auto-tuned erotic love songs while Legion troops swarm the stage and try to kill us. Beating the final foot soldiers sees Gaunt's little platform overheating for a moment and his fancy auto-tuner microphone faltering for a moment, allowing the crowd to see just how fake his singing really is. It also gives us the idea that if we can disrupt the microphone Gaunt's using, Gaunt's fans will leave in anger and protest, with him no longer being able to mind control them. So we do battle with more Legion troops, as well as fans that Gaunt is mind-controlling to rush the stage and attack us. Turns out we're supposed to stun them, but I missed that prompt, so the first wave I just gunned down. Oops. During this phase, Gaunt actually does some audible singing while we work to turn off his autotune, and I must admit, I kinda like the song. Sadly, that's not enough to save him, and 3 console hacks later, his fans are leaving in droves after learning that 95% of his talent comes from his auto-tuning program. But then, something interesting happens. As we arrest Gaunt and drag him back to the Ark, we're shown a cutscene of another one of Babylon's henchmen sneaking around backstage, plugging something into a computer called Aisha, which is a callback to Saints Row 1 and 2, and commenting that Gaunt didn't even know what he had. Color me intrigued. Since we just dealt with a supposedly musically inclined bad guy, now seems like a good time as any to talk about Agents of Mayhem's soundtrack. Honestly, I feel Agents of Mayhem really dropped the ball with the soundtrack. Recently, I've gotten in the habit of turning down sound effects and other ambient sounds in video games, so as to spend some time just listening to the game's soundtrack and music, and see how it interacts with the world as I go about playing the game. Well, when I did that with Agents of Mayhem, I was met with mostly audible silence and only the occasional dramatic sound effect. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure if this is a bug or not. According to YouTube and some of the articles I read, there are a total of 82 songs in the game, and there are definitely moments when the music does kick in during an important scene, but the moment-to-moment music either just wasn't there or was so minimal that I'm not really sure if I can even call it background music. Music that plays while in vehicles isn't much better, with pretty much every song having this feel of a public domain or free use pop tune to it. Not only that, but I feel like the volume in this game is slightly out of whack, as half the time when I was in a vehicle, I couldn't even hear the music that was playing over everything else. Outside of the game, I did pull up YouTube and listen to the soundtrack, and it was just okay. I will say that for the most part, the sound design of this game is pretty good though. Weapons and abilities have good sound effects to them, though I do take slight issue with Hollywood's main weapon. It sounds way too high-pitched. Though vehicles sound decent, the sound of Mayhem vehicles is definitely tweaked so they sound much more intimidating than civilian vehicles. But sound design can only carry something for so long, and without a decent sounding soundtrack to amp up the player, a lot of combat encounters just feel kinda meh to me, and don't really leave me feeling like I've accomplished much. Funnily enough, after I defeated Gaunt, I did start to notice music a little bit more in the game, so I'm not sure if that was like a plot thing that he was blocking radio stations or something, but I just thought that was kind of funny. So it turns out this mystery henchman sneaking around is named Steel Toe. Actually, if you've done SafeWord's loyalty mission, you've already encountered him and possibly killed him once already. Steel Toe, terrible codename by the way, is a trans-cyberneticist, meaning he believes that man and machine can reach their fullest potential only by interfacing and merging together in a form of apotheosis. Think the middle ending from Mass Effect. Our first mission against Steel Toe has us sneaking into another Legion base he had been using. Going through the old base footage has us seeing Steel Toe and Aisha are in love, and he has some kind of plan for her. The next mission sees us crashing their wedding, which results in a pretty decent boss battle actually. First phase is your basic shoot him till he dies phase. Second phase sees us needing to defeat holographic wedding guests while hacking a turret to drain Steel Toe's shields before we can hurt him again. And the third phase has Steel Toe and Aisha merging partially, which causes Steel Toe to grow larger, move faster, and deal more damage, while also splitting Aisha into different versions of herself and projecting them around the wedding venue. And it's here that our player has a bit of a choice. Do we focus on Steel Toe and just blast our way through his newly found power and damage, or do we take the time to disable the Aisha holograms, each of which will weaken Steel Toe and allow you to deal progressively more and more damage? I ended up doing the latter, and Steel Toe goes down pretty hard with his AI waifu doing her best to try and kill us by self-destructing the floating ship that we're on. I do feel kind of bad for killing him on his wedding night, but the dude was evil, and a simp. He kinda had it coming. Well, as it turns out, Aisha isn't done with us. We're treated to a cutscene that shows Aisha and her sisters talking amongst themselves and deciding what to do next. And the following mission sees us running around Seoul trying to destroy speakers that are blasting a bad romance song that they wrote, that somehow also has the power to make those listening to it want to kill themselves? Apparently, they're channeling their sadness over the death of Steel Toe or some such bullshit. In truth, they're probably using Gaunt's mind-controlling technology to do this, but since it's never directly stated, that's a total assumption and might be giving the game a little too much credit, honestly. Aisha then attempts to attack the Ark directly, and Mixer, one of the NPCs that we can interact with, he runs the VR training room, has a brilliant idea of allowing her inside the system so they can quarantine and contain her. Okay, firstly, this is just a horrible plan. She's an AI, which means she is 99% guaranteed to be a better hacker than you. Not only that, but unless you're quarantining her on an air-gapped computer, she will eventually find a way out of any prison you build for her. Anyone who knows anything about computers should be able to tell you this. Hell, at least two of the heroes, SafeWord and Jewel, are technology experts. They should be able to speak up and tell everyone what a bad plan this is. But no, we go through with it and end up plugging ourselves into the Matrix so we can battle Aisha and help quarantine her different personalities, which have all split into different sisters. This segment plays very much like the training rooms do. The arena is bathed in neon light and grid patterns in a very early 90s interpretation of what cyberspace might look like, and battling the sisters isn't very hard, with each of them taking on a color that corresponds to one of the stages of grief. The first sister has an interesting but underexplained gimmick where I have to follow her around the room, jumping from platform to platform until I guess she gets tired and I catch her. That's not how computers work. The second sister calls a bunch of digital soldiers to kill me while she tries to hack the Ark's self-destruct sequence, but after I kill all her goons, we catch her and move on to the third sister. Here, we get some plot development, as while we jump from platform to platform opening chests to gather bits of code, we converse with this sister and offer her something if she'll stop her attempts to destroy Mayhem, a physical robotic body to inhabit. The next sister we deal with takes major issue with this and does everything in her power to kill us, while also working to break out the previously quarantined sisters. Hey, remember when I mentioned storing them on an air-gapped drive? If they'd done this, then rescuing the previous sisters would have been impossible. In fact, this sister, who is channeling the anger stage of grief, is so dangerous that she attempts to crash the simulation we're in, which would leave us a mindless husk of a body. Luckily, the sister representing acceptance saves us at the last moment and helps us escape while the simulation crumbles around us and we barely survive. And while we failed in our mission, we did gain an ally, so it wasn't a total failure. Meanwhile, back in their little digital space, the remaining Aisha sisters are trying to figure out what to do when the anger sister snaps and kills one of the other sisters before deciding to go full psycho on us. I'm going to skip over part of the next mission, but it basically ends with us fighting the anger sister and a giant half-finished robot that Steel Toe had been building her as a wedding present. I have to admit, this battle does kind of remind me of the final battle at the end of Mass Effect 2, where we fight the half-formed Reaper in the Collector base, shooting beam weapons on the hands, causing the head to explode, weak spots. It's all by the book and pretty predictable if I'm honest, but it was a nice callback. In the end, we succeed, and the sister that represents acceptance is able to talk her other sisters down and help her along the path to healing. Overall, this arc was definitely not what I expected in the beginning, but I had fun with it. The whole being in love with an AI was pretty cringy if I'm honest, and Steel Toe definitely gives off major simp vibes, but it was cool to see Aisha going through a mini but complete villain arc, and it was also kind of neat that a playable character's loyalty mission hinted at this villain before we ever actually met them. Character missions make an appearance in Agents of Mayhem, which sees us taking some time away from the main plot of the game to instead pursue some goal or objective that is personal to whatever hero we are currently playing. I'll freely admit that one mistake I made while playing this game was to rush through all of the character missions. In most modern games, completing character-centered missions usually unlocks some new ability for them, or else opens them up to be a romance option, or at the very least allows you to upgrade that character to their highest level. Basically, the mission acts as a kind of gate that needs to be opened to maximize the use of that character. Sadly, in Agents of Mayhem, that's not how character missions work. Pretty much all characters have a 3-mission arc of some kind. The first mission undertaken by whatever character you're currently playing, but usually relating in some way to the soon-to-be unlocked hero. The second mission is the first time you're introduced to the new character, and you're given a short animated introduction, usually a minute or so too long, to showcase the hero, their background, and give you a hint as to their motivations. Honestly, I love these. They're done with such style and care that they honestly feel like they're out of some cartoon or comic book. And I love that each character mission has its own mission and title card at the beginning, like it's a specific episode of the show. The missions themselves are a bit of a grab bag, which pretty much always boils down to, hey agent, someone somewhere is causing trouble, go kill them. Which is fair enough, I suppose. That is why these characters are playable after all, so they can go kill Legion soldiers and further Mayhem's goals. It's definitely not deep storytelling, but the characters themselves are fun and entertaining to play as. For the sake of brevity, I won't go through and discuss every agent and their loyalty missions, but most of them are extensions of the themes I rattled off back in the character introduction sequence, such as Rama's loyalty mission being about finding the scientist who engineered the Mumbai plague before they are executed by Legion, or Lazarus's mission, who follows a string of clues to try and figure out who or what transformed her when she died into her current state. Voice acting is a bit cheesy, definitely having that over-the-top Saturday morning cartoon cliche to them, but in the moment-to-moment gameplay, I enjoyed them quite a lot. Completing the second mission of the character arc usually has some big revelation being dropped on the player, which sets them up for the third and final mission. And it's here that the writing and pacing kind of falters to me. As someone who is invested in the narrative of these characters, if I am presented with some big revelation and then immediately given the option to resolve revelation, I will do so right away. So immediately allowing the player to dive into the third mission creates a bit of a problem later on down the line. See, if you bull rush all the character missions right away, then by the midpoint of the game after you've unlocked every character, there isn't much narratively speaking to stop you from just rushing the remaining story missions and finishing the game, which leaves the game feeling very front-heavy but lacking in missions in the second half. I think instead what the game should have done is gated missions behind a combination of player level and plot progression. That way each character would have some time to sit with their initial revelation and give the player time to think on it before continuing on to the resolution. Now, I did discover as I played that some characters would get a group mission to go raid some Legion base together, which sort of acts as another character mission, I suppose, but I only got 2 or 3 of these to trigger during my playthrough, so I'm not really sure how I feel about them. At the end of Steel Toe's plotline, we get another short but interesting cutscene. Babylon, cursing his inept subordinates, is suddenly accosted by a strange woman who looks like if Harley Quinn spent about a month doing meth. Babylon initially reacts with contempt and disgust and attempts to cause the girl pain, only for her to laugh and say that the chip he installed in her brain isn't effective anymore. She points out that his time is running out and that the price for his failure will be high, but she also offers him a deal. Give her soul and she'll help him with his plans. He agrees, and we're left wondering what's going on. Meet Ariadne, a former Mayhem programmer or computer specialist who is apparently a genius amongst geniuses, but was kidnapped, brainwashed, and turned to Legion's side. Okay, we need to pause here for a second because I gotta be honest, I dislike this character. A lot. Like, a lot. And it centers around her archetype, what I like to call the savant autistic psychopath. Can I be honest? What they want her to be is this super skilled, super insane girl who doesn't see anyone else as a real person and thus views them as lesser beings to be experimented on or killed. Except they've got her reprogramming robots to trash the city, spray painting graffiti over everything, and obsessing over Gremlin, Mayhem's current tech nerd. Not only that, but she reprograms cute little mascots that we've been seeing all over town into being these booby traps that attack us when we invade her base later on. Honestly, everything about her screams manic pixie girl rather than autistic savant psychopath. All of which really makes me think that they forgot their original goal with her and just tried to make some kind of a Harley Quinn knockoff that was just good with computers. Her first mission is pretty boring and just sees us rescuing citizens from the robots she's reprogrammed. Persephone does warn us that Ariadne is a powerful and dangerous adversary, but that's about all that happens in her first mission. Her second mission is a bit more interesting, with her using these kind of psionic bubbles to extract the consciousness from random people on the street and store them in a Legion database. Though I will point out that Steel Toe could already do this, as it is mentioned that he can download and upload his consciousness into different bodies that he has stashed in different places, so I'm not sure how this is any different. After stopping her a few times, she reveals that her real target is all the scientists and doctors at the Seoul Tech Expo. Beating her has us running a timed course while Gremlin does some hacking and modifying of a power amplifier before we spend some time killing more baddies and disrupting the field that she's using. For once, though, we're too late. Even as we disable the field, we discover Ariadne has successfully downloaded the consciousness of everyone that had been at the expo. And as it turns out, the only reason she did this was so that she could cut her head open and remove a chip from her brain that Babylon had implanted in her, which, again, is questionable. I feel like what she really needed was a CAT scan and a craniotomy surgery. Or if she was dead set on using the consciousness bubble thing, wouldn't it have made more sense to use it on a hospital full of people with medical knowledge? Also, while we're on the subject, can I just say how dumb this whole little moment is? Now, I get that she's insane and completely deranged, but if I were cutting something out of my head, I'd want a sterile environment. I'd want clean tools and some kind of anesthetic or nerve blocker to keep me from feeling anything. She has none of that as far as we can tell, and instead cuts her head open using a switchblade and a mirror so she can see what she's doing. I can almost guarantee you that in the real world, even if she didn't pass out from the neural overload of ripping a computer chip out of her brain matter, she would have died from infection. I get that she did it for plot reasons, but come on, this kind of crap drives me, a rational thinking, hyper-analytical person, kind of crazy with how unrealistic it is. Later, we're shown a cutscene of Gremlin in the Ark making little animal figures in her spare time when she hears a sound and goes to investigate. Good news, the sound is being made by Gremlin's robotic dog. Bad news, that robotic dog has been hacked and distracts her long enough for someone, 3 guesses who, to come up behind her and knock her out. Cue our next mission, when we get a message from Friday who is frantic to find Gremlin, whose biosignature is showing as coming from a nearby abandoned Legion base. But when we get there, it's not business as usual, as Ariadne has altered the hacking minigame to be way less forgiving. Failing it twice sees us falling down the elevator shaft and arriving at Ariadne's base. And I'm not going to mince words here. This place sucks. It's full of traps that have these really annoying find and destroy the transmitter mini missions, and there's not really anything noteworthy to talk about until the end when it's revealed that Ariadne wants to download the knowledge from Gremlin's brain into her own. The boss battle with her is kind of annoying too, initially requiring us to just beat the shit out of her, before shifting to a second phase where we have to collect power-ups to damage the pod that Gremlin is being held in. Like with Steel Toe, we're given the choice to power through the pod's damage reduction or collect these orbs that are whizzing all over the arena to enhance our damage, but this time I just opt to keep blasting and eventually we free Gremlin. Ariadne says this strange line about what I could have been before laying Gremlin on a nearby couch and initiating the third phase of the battle, where we have to bait her into attacking things around the arena that will stun her. And unfortunately, at the end of the battle, she escapes down a trapdoor, leaving us to take care of Gremlin as she slowly awakes and discovers that her intelligence has been copied. I really wanted to kill Ariadne. In fact, this entire arc really has me wishing that this game had some kind of kill or spare mechanic just so I could kill her every single time. I really do not like this character. In superhero media, the city that the hero protects can be just as important as the heroes themselves. After all, what is Batman without Gotham, or the Powerpuff Girls without the city of Townsville? In Agents of Mayhem, the city we have is the futuristic metropolis of Seoul. On the surface, it's a very clean-looking futuristic city, with flourishes of Asian influence mixed in with progressive and modern aesthetics that sort of waver between traditional and majorly futuristic. The city itself is pretty to look at and run around in, with vibrant colors and a consistent look to it, and is divided up into several unlabeled but distinct districts. Despite this, the open world of Agents of Mayhem is definitely a product of its time, as the more I spent playing in it, the more I found myself being reminded of how older open world games were constructed versus newer open world games. In older games, open worlds always had this feeling of a background to me, a place for your character to run through and around, but with barely any interaction from the player themselves. Yes, they could be charming and oftentimes had distinct personalities, but first and foremost they were made for the character to run around and through. I'd say probably the best example of this would be Assassin's Creed 1's open world, which while beautiful to look at and very detailed, didn't have much for the character to interact with in a long-term kind of way. The city of Seoul feels like it's meant to be the background for the game first, and a playground for players to run around in second. Very little within the city is actually interactable, with the exceptions being chests that you unlock, elevators to ride, and mission icons that must be interacted with to trigger them. Random events do happen in the world, but never quite in the way that I want, with Legion patrols, hostage situations, recon races, destruction of Legion property, and vehicle acquisition missions being the main side activities for players to engage in when not running main character missions or the main story missions. Hidden Legion bases do pop up from time to time, and they are a welcome addition to the activity roster, but the lack of different activities can definitely lead to feelings of fatigue and burnout if you don't enjoy busywork-style questing. It also doesn't help that none of these activities really lend themselves to a feeling of progress within the city. No matter how many faceless, nameless hostages I save, I'll never be told why Legion kidnapped them in the first place. No matter how many patrols I wipe out, I'll never learn why they were patrolling that alley or that park. And no matter how many Legion bases I take, we'll never really learn what they were doing there or see their presence in the city diminish in any way. Running a bunch of these activities together can lead to a feeling of pointless busywork, which does nothing to progress the story forward and only serves to enrich the player and their token resources. Now, Seoul does have its charm. I enjoy running around the shopping district, leaping from rooftop to rooftop before dropping down into an alleyway to kill some Legion troopers and collect the chest they seem to be guarding before calling my car and racing off for the umpteenth random hostage. But it wasn't until I was talking with a friend about the open world of Agents of Mayhem and how dated it felt that I think I hit upon the core reason why it feels so dated and empty to me. And it has as much to do with Volition's previous Saints Row games as it does with Agents of Mayhem. In Saints Row, a big part of the game is earning passive income, so that you generate money while playing, which encourages you to not solely focus on story missions, but also just kill time and let that income climb higher and higher while you fuck around and find out in the world. After which, when you grow tired of how you look or wish to upgrade your character, you can use that passively earned income to do so. The game world is littered with weapons and apparel shops for you to spend that money at. Agents of Mayhem has a similar, albeit very scaled-back version of passive income, generated first by completing missions and later by killing Legion soldiers, before you liberate certain black market vendors who will then kick up a portion of their profits to you in an amount per minute. Yet, there's very little to actually spend money on. There are no stores anywhere in Sol. Anywhere. Money can only be spent at the Ark to upgrade the Mayhem organization through a list of upgrades that is painfully small and never really provides a noticeable difference outside of a few very specific upgrades. Money can also be spent to build new tech for agents to use in the field, but that's it. And simply put, the open world feels dated because there's very little in the way of interacting with it that doesn't directly relate back to your missions. There's nothing to faff about and enjoy. Honestly, the city feels more like it was made for an MMO or instant-style game, where interactions with the city need to be minimal so as not to crash the game. At the same time, I kinda get City of Hero vibes from the architecture and aesthetic as well as the world scale, which is not an insult, as City of Heroes is one of my favorite games. Sadly, no hero in the game has the ability of true flight, so we're unable to appreciate the city from all angles, which is a shame, because some of the buildings are very interesting to look at and would no doubt be fun to fly between. Overall, the city of Sol is a fun but empty playground to run around in. The occasional activity that dots its streets aren't enough to keep players entertained or give them a sense of making a difference in the long term. Now yes, these activities might be good for leveling up the player character and helping the player earn cash and upgrade tokens, but at the end of the day, they're just too few and far between to make this open world feel better, and not reactive enough to become its own ongoing narrative. And while we're on the subject, the lack of a multiplayer mode in this game is a real detriment. Honestly, I think this game would have been 10 times better if you had been limited to maybe only 1 or 2 heroes, but could have teamed up with other players that were playing their own set of heroes. That could have completely changed the feel of the game, as it now has you teaming up with different players to complete different missions and different challenges, in addition to the main missions, fighting the bad guys and saving the world. In fact, it's the lack of multiplayer that I think is Agents of Mayhem's biggest flaw. If they had included a multiplayer system, I honestly think this game would have reviewed so much better than it did. So it turns out that, like with all great supervillains, Babylon's final plan is to build a giant robot. When Gremlin was connected to Legion's mainframe, she was able to technopathically access some of Babylon's plans, which winds up with us going back to where we fought Aisha and her giant robot. Turns out, after the battle, Babylon took that robot and hid it underneath one of Sol's ancestral temples. When we arrive at that temple, Legion is hell-bent on stopping us, not that they can. Okay, for realsies though, this mission is probably one of the most unfun missions in the game. We're in a Korean ancestral temple looking for a giant monster robot. You think that they would maybe need to hack some terminals to locate a secret door, or maybe we'd need to find some power cables and follow them until they reveal a secret entrance, or maybe we'd ambush a guard and steal his uniform and sneak into another underground base. Nope. 90% of this mission is destroying infrastructure. That is to say, these stupid little power crates, Legion vehicles, power generators, and databases that are just lying around everywhere, all while dodging and fighting an infinitely spawning number of difficult Legion troops. These are the same things that I complained about earlier in Legion bases that always explode when you shoot them. It's like they made 5 different kinds of exploding barrels and now have an entire mission centered around destroying a certain number of these in a certain amount of time. So once we're done destroying things, we somehow find the robot, codenamed Damocles, but we also discover, in an odd stroke of genius, the robot cannot be controlled from the ancestral temple, but instead has a control center hidden somewhere in the city. Well played, I'll admit. The next mission starts us off with a bang, as suddenly the Ark is under attack from Sol's automated defense wall. Dodging artillery from the wall, we make our way to the control room and shoot our way inside, and take down the wall's turrets before turning over control of those turrets to Mayhem, which does give us a fun new toy to play with, the ability to call in an artillery strike at will. With the Ark no longer in danger, we race to the Tech Expo, which is also apparently the control room for Damocles. When we get near, Legion erects a force field to try and keep us out, so we spend the next several minutes destroying reactors with our newfound artillery, and hopping from platform to platform while hacking different terminals and working to shut down the force field. When we finally do succeed, we somehow hack the control center so hard that it ejects Babylon from it in a manner that reminds me of Team Rocket. It's silly and definitely dumb, but that's superhero media for you. With the day saved, we head back to the Ark to celebrate. Meanwhile, we see a cutscene of Babylon sneaking into Damocles and taking control of it from the inside. Okay, tangent here. They said the robot needed a control room to work, but now we see Babylon controlling the robot from the inside, which makes sense if it's more of a power suit. So my first question is this a robot or a power suit? And secondly, does it need a control room or not? Because if it can be used and controlled internally, then there was absolutely no need for a control room in the first place. Anyway, Babylon takes control of Damocles and flies out to space to grab the Cermak comet. Upon grabbing it, Babylon begins to monologue about being the smartest and most loyal of Legion's generals. And it's here that something starts to feel off. Babylon is laughing a little too maniacally and acting a little too deranged even for him. And that's when Ariadne calls and reveals her big plan. After she cut the chip Babylon had given her out of her brain, she installed it on the neural interface that is used by the pilot to control Damocles, meaning the longer Babylon has used the robot, the more the chip has been driving him insane. And it's then that Babylon snaps, declaring himself the supreme leader of Legion and announcing his plan to use the comet and its not really mentioned before reality warping effects to remake reality in his image. As our reality starts to warp and fall apart, Persephone issues us our final orders. Stop Dr. Babylon at all costs. To do this, we end up driving our car into one of the reality tears, and we find ourselves in an alternate and fractured world of Babylon's making. Fighting our way through Legion troops, we eventually find ourselves in a dark version of the Ark, where Babylon tries to kill us by resurrecting the lieutenants of Legion that we have spent all game defeating. Hammersmith, August Gaunt, Steeltoe, Aisha, and Ariadne, before we eventually do battle with Babylon himself. Funnily enough, for all his power, Babylon isn't too hard to beat. His main attack is to fire these dark matter cluster missiles at you, which cover a wide area but don't deal a ton of damage. 1,000 bullets, arrows, and blasts later, and he goes down like the little bitch he is. Fun fact, I also accidentally called in an artillery strike using the Soul defense wall, and it still worked, so I guess those turrets are somehow able to fire into alternate dimensions? Defeating Babylon sees us shattering the Cermak comet, causing his dark reality to implode and be destroyed, followed by a cutscene of Babylon being dragged away by Anthony Longinus to be punished for his failure to Legion. Meanwhile, Persephone says that with Legion defeated, Mayhem will be leaving Sol. And that's the end of the game. And no, there is no after-credit cutscene. One thing that I feel the need to bring up that I normally wouldn't is the game's sense of humor. While there's nothing in it that's outright offensive or mean-spirited, the game very much has a mid-2010s sense of humor, meaning it can be very hit or miss if you are not a fan of that era of comedy. Some of the slapstick I find pretty enjoyable. Hollywood has some pretty good one-liners and zingers that are fun to listen to when I play as him, but the whole sequence at the planetarium where they're making Uranus jokes is pretty annoying and honestly feels like it was included to try and appeal to the lowest possible denominator. OG Saints Row never would have made that joke. Hell, even the rebooted Saints Row wouldn't have made that joke, or maybe they would have made the joke but then immediately pointed out how cringy it is. Some characters like August Gaunt or Daisy are meant to be almost exclusively comic relief, but their jokes and style of humor feel dated in a way that is painfully noticeable by today's standards. And while I do enjoy a bit of raunchy humor here and there, their constant barrage of it from characters who seem to think of nothing else but smutty one-liners and innuendos can get very tiring very quickly. So much so that it can even become damaging to the character, making them feel one-dimensional and stupid, with their only purpose in the game to be to spout their lame jokes and try to incite a cheap laugh or two from the player. Like I said, I normally wouldn't bring up the humor because humor is subjective, but I feel I should with this game, as the humor is a big part of the game's writing, to a degree that you can't really escape it. So if you're not a fan of 2010s style humor, this game might not be for you. Normally, this is where I would discuss how I'd fix the game, but honestly, fixing this game would be pretty tricky. So much of it and its issues are wrapped up in the dated nature of the game and its humor. I definitely think the city could have been a little more fleshed out and reactive to the player. Saints Row 3 had radio reports that would let the player know what the common man's reaction to their antics were. Something like that would have gone a long way to making the city feel more alive and reactive to the player and the various missions that they have to undergo. The soundtrack is probably the biggest thing I'd change, that is to say, including a decent one. I honestly cannot understand what happened with the soundtrack and the lack of decent music for this game, especially since the Saints Row games have had such a good lineup of music in the past. I can remember spending hours creating a custom playlist while I was playing in Saints Row 3 and 4. Gameplay-wise, I wouldn't mind seeing a skill tree for each hero, but that's maybe my own personal preference creeping in, as I enjoy having options with my characters. Then again, I'm a major RPG nerd, which this is not. When it comes to movement and interacting with the city, I'm torn. Saints Row 4 did an amazing job at realizing the concept of superhuman movement with its super speed and super jumping. In fact, to date, I'd say it's probably the game that has best realized how getting around with such powers would work. But part of that was because the world of Saints Row 4 was built to accommodate that. Soul was not. So while I do find myself wishing that I could race through the city with superhuman speed, or leap to the top of tall buildings in a single bound, I understand why those things were not included. So maybe I would meet myself in the middle, and give us one or two heroes that have these abilities so we could use them if we wanted to, but also make the city a little easier for other heroes to move around in. Maybe the Mayhem cars could have an ejector seat or something to give them a boost when trying to reach really tall building tops. I think the biggest thing I would change would be to make this game multiplayer co-op as well as add a versus mode to it. The game has a great foundation, and had it had the ability to run around as different heroes with your friends and work together to save the day, it might have been a smash hit. Honestly, as I'm describing it and picturing it in my head, it's basically open world Overwatch, which sounds like a concept that would just win automatically. An online post I saw recently bemoaned that today's kids will never understand the terror and fear of missing out that would grip you when you'd hear your siblings shout from the other room, "It's back on!" while waiting for your toast to pop on Saturday morning. In a way, I can't help but agree with this statement. We live in a world of extreme conveniences, when something as casual as watching cartoons has been catered to us to such a degree that we can just pause the cartoon if we need to do something else, or just don't feel like watching cartoons in that exact moment. And to me, this breaks a little bit of the magic that the appeal of Saturday morning cartoons had. If you'll forgive me this old man yells at cloud moment, I can't help but be grateful for growing up when and how I did back in my day, when it was understood between myself and my parents that Saturday morning was my time to watch cartoons and nothing else, and that leaving the room for even a second risked the chance that I'd miss some detail or event that might or might not be important to the show's plot. Agents of Mayhem definitely brings a spark of that old feeling back, from the over-the-top characters and designs to the slightly ridiculous plots and schemes to the surprisingly good animated cutscenes that feel as if they were ripped right out of an old Saturday morning cartoon show. The developers who built this game knew the vibes they wanted to shoot for, and in many ways, I think they hit them pretty spot on. Agents of Mayhem feels like a playable Saturday morning cartoon in almost all the right places. But the ones they did miss keep the game from being great. A lack of multiplayer, a slightly annoying need to refer back to characters and icons from their past games, an open world that, while creative, is also bland and rather boring, and combat that just never feels 100% right no matter how strong you get or how many tweaks you make. Honestly, I think my biggest pet peeve about this game is the constant references to the Saints Row games. These games are iconic in their own way, and to try and reference them and say that, hey, it's just like them but completely different, is probably Agents of Mayhem's biggest blunder. In trying to reference their past games, Agents of Mayhem muddles its own identity. Imagine if this game didn't have any of those references, and was instead its own standalone setting and world. Sure, it might be a little generic as far as mid to late 2000 superhero games go, but it might have been able to do something more with some of these characters, or perhaps it might have come up with a completely different character for you to play as, ones that were better than the characters we actually got. It might even have gotten a sequel. Hell, it might have been popular enough that it would be its own thriving franchise right now. But perhaps the secret to enjoying Agents of Mayhem is not to look at it with the eyes of a critic or an analyst. Perhaps the best way to experience it is through the eyes of a child, sitting down to enjoy his Saturday morning cartoons, Cereal bowl in one hand, TV remote in the other, with not a single thought about homework or chores, and instead a desire to see how the world will be threatened today and how your favorite heroes are going to save it. Thanks for watching.